A clash of principles. The Atlanta skyline glittered with the golden hues of the morning sun, casting long shadows across the city's streets. Amidst the bustling downtown, a large construction site buzzed with activity. Trucks rumbled, cranes swayed, and the metallic clang of tools filled the air like a chaotic symphony. Overseeing this controlled chaos was Jordan Blake, a young but highly respected structural engineer. At just 34, he had already made a name for himself as a trailblazer in urban design, known for his precision and leadership. Jordan stood near the site office, reviewing blueprints with his team. He cut a sharp figure in his steel-toed boots, a reflective vest over his crisp shirt, and a white hard hat that bore his name in bold black letters. His calm yet authoritative demeanor inspired confidence among the workers. He treated everyone with respect, from the grizzled foreman to the wide-eyed apprentices. As Jordan checked the structural schematics, a sudden commotion drew his attention. A police cruiser rolled onto the gravel driveway, its flashing lights off, but its presence unmistakable. The workers glanced at each other, uneasy murmurs spreading like ripples. The car door swung open, and a tall officer in a spotless uniform stepped out. His name badge gleamed under the sunlight. Officer Kurt Wallace. Wallace removed his sunglasses and surveyed the site with a practiced, authoritative gaze. He zeroed in on Jordan as if drawn by an invisible thread. His stride was deliberate, exuding an air of control. "You?" Wallace barked, his voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the hum of machinery. "Come here." Jordan turned, his calm eyes meeting the officer's intense glare. He set his clipboard aside, brushing the dust from his gloves. "Yes, officer. How can I help you?" Wallace stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms over his chest. "Is this your site?" "Yes, I'm the lead engineer," Jordan replied, his voice steady but polite. Wallace raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched across his face. "Really? You don't look the part." The air grew tense. A few workers paused, exchanging uneasy glances. Jordan's jaw tightened, but his expression remained neutral. He had encountered attitudes like this before, and while it never got easier, he had learned to navigate them with composure. "I can assure you, officer," Jordan said calmly, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. If there's a concern, I'd be happy to address it." Wallace stepped closer, his tone turning condescending. "We got a call about suspicious activity here. Figured I'd check it out. And you caught my eye." Jordan took a deep breath, willing himself to remain calm. He glanced around, noticing how the workers had stopped to watch. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about how he handled the situation for everyone's sake. "Suspicious activity at a construction site?" Jordan asked, his voice even. "What specifically concerns you, officer?" Wallace smirked, pulling out a notepad. "You could start by showing me some ID. Unless, of course, you've got something to hide." Jordan's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked at Wallace squarely. "Officer, I respect your duty to investigate, but I'm curious. Did you ask for identification from anyone else here before singling me out?" The murmurs among the workers grew louder, a few stepping closer to observe. Wallace's face darkened, but he didn't back down. "Don't try to turn this into something it's not," he snapped. "I'm just doing my job." Jordan nodded thoughtfully, his measured tone never wavering. "And I'm doing mine. If you'd like proof of who I am, I can introduce you to the project manager. Or, if you prefer, I can call the city's engineering department to verify my credentials." Wallace hesitated, his arrogance faltering under Jordan's composed rebuttal. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. "Let's meet this manager of yours." Jordan turned toward the trailer at the far end of the site, his steps steady and deliberate. As they walked, the workers parted to let them pass, their silent support evident in their nods and murmurs. The project manager, a gruff man named Ricardo Torres, was already stepping out of the trailer, his brow furrowed in curiosity. "Jordan," he called, his booming voice carrying across the lot. "Everything okay here?" Officer Wallace wanted to verify my role on this project, Jordan explained, his tone neutral but firm. I thought you could help clear things up. Ricardo's eyes narrowed as he took in Wallace's stance. This man. Ricardo barked, gesturing toward Jordan. He's the brains behind this whole operation. If he says he's in charge, you'd better believe it. Wallace's cheeks flushed, but he forced a curt nod. Just doing my due diligence. Jordan turned to Wallace, his voice firm yet calm. I understand your position, officer, but it's important to recognize how actions like this can come across. Treating someone with skepticism based solely on appearances doesn't build trust. It erodes it. Wallace stiffened, his jaw working as though he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. I'll keep that in mind, he muttered, avoiding Jordan's gaze. As Wallace walked back to his cruiser, the workers erupted into applause, their solidarity filling the air with a newfound energy. Jordan raised a hand, signaling for calm, but a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. This wasn't over, not for him. Change didn't come from moments like this alone. It came from the choices made afterward. And Jordan knew he had work to do. A spark of change. The echoes of the workers' applause had barely faded when Jordan Blake returned to the center of the construction site. The moment with Officer Wallace lingered in the air like a stubborn storm cloud, thick with tension and unspoken questions. Jordan could feel the eyes of his team following him as he resumed his position near the blueprints. Though he had handled the situation calmly, he knew the encounter was far from forgotten. Not by the workers, and certainly not by him. Jordan's phone buzzed in his pocket, jolting him from his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw a text from Ricardo Torres, the project manager. Got your back. If you need me to file a report about that officer, just say the word. Jordan smiled faintly. Ricardo wasn't the most expressive man, but his loyalty ran deep. Jordan typed a quick reply. Thanks. Let's focus on finishing this project for now. I'll handle the rest later. As Jordan slipped his phone back into his pocket, his mind began to churn. The confrontation with Wallace had been just one instance in a long pattern of challenges he had faced as a black professional in a field where he was often underestimated. This time, though, it felt different. The silent support of his crew, Ricardo's backing, and even the subtle shift in Wallace's demeanor as he walked away. It all hinted at a larger opportunity. Perhaps this was the moment to do more than simply endure. A call for unity. The lunch whistle blew, and workers began to gather around the shaded seating area near the food trucks. Jordan rarely joined them. He preferred to eat quickly at his desk while reviewing plans, but today felt like an exception. He grabbed his lunch and headed to the group, drawing curious glances as he approached. Mind if I sit? Jordan asked, gesturing to an empty spot on one of the benches. A burly welder named Mason grinned. About time you joined us, boss. We were starting to think you don't eat. The group chuckled, and Jordan smiled as he unwrapped his sandwich. For a few moments, the conversation flowed easily. Jokes about the morning's mishaps, updates on progress, and plans for the weekend. But it wasn't long before someone brought up the elephant in the room. That cop, a younger worker named Andrew said, shaking his head. Man, he had no right to talk to you like that. Yeah, Mason added, his voice tinged with anger. We all saw how he singled you out. That wasn't right. Jordan set his sandwich down, his expression thoughtful. I appreciate you all standing by me, he said, his voice calm but firm. But this isn't just about me. What happened today is part of something bigger, and it's something we all need to be aware of. The workers fell silent, their attention fully on Jordan. I've dealt with situations like this my whole career, he continued. It's frustrating, yes, but what's more important is how we respond. It's not enough to call out the behavior. We need to find ways to change it. Andrew frowned. What can we do? It's not like we have any power over cops. Jordan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. We have more power than you think. Every time we speak up, every time we stand together, we send a message, And when enough people send that message, things start to shift. The group nodded, their initial frustration transforming into a sense of purpose. Jordan could see the spark of understanding in their eyes, and it gave him hope. This wasn't just a construction site, it was a microcosm of the world outside. And if they could learn to navigate these challenges here, maybe they could inspire change elsewhere. An unexpected visitor. Later that afternoon, as Jordan was reviewing progress reports in his temporary site office, a knock at the door pulled him from his focus. He looked up to see a young woman in a business suit standing in the doorway. Her sharp features and confident posture suggested she wasn't just another contractor. "Jordan Blake?" she asked, stepping into the office. "Yes, that's me," Jordan replied, setting his clipboard aside. "How can I help you?" The woman extended a hand. "I'm Layla Torres. I work with the city's Civil Rights Commission. I heard about what happened this morning." Jordan raised an eyebrow, surprised. That was fast. Layla smiled. "News travels quickly when it involves a city contractor and law enforcement. I'm here because we want to support you. Incidents like this are more common than most people realize, and they often go unreported. We'd like to document what happened and explore ways to address it." Jordan hesitated. He had always been cautious about drawing attention to himself, preferring to focus on his work and let his results speak for him. But something about Layla's presence, her calm, professional demeanor, made him reconsider. "All right," he said, motioning for her to sit. "Let's talk." The seeds of a movement. As Layla took notes on the encounter, Jordan found himself opening up more than he had expected. He described not just the morning's events, but also the countless microaggressions and outright biases he had faced throughout his career. Layla listened intently, her pen moving swiftly across the page. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "You're not alone, Jordan. Stories like yours are far too common, and they highlight systemic issues that need to be addressed. Have you considered taking a more active role in advocating for change?" Jordan blinked, caught off guard. "Me? I'm an engineer, not an activist." Layla smiled. "You don't have to be an activist to make a difference. Your story has power, and your position gives you credibility. If you're willing, we can help you turn this moment into something larger, a catalyst for real change." Jordan leaned back in his chair, her words swirling in his mind. He had always believed in leading by example, but the idea of stepping into the spotlight, of using his experiences to challenge the status quo, was daunting. Still, he couldn't deny the truth in Layla's words. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or profiled. "All right," he said finally. "What do you have in mind?" A plan takes shape. Over the next hour, Layla outlined a plan. The Civil Rights Commission would organize a series of community workshops on implicit bias and equity, using Jordan's story as a starting point. The workshops would bring together law enforcement, local leaders, and community members to foster dialogue and understanding. Jordan listened carefully, his initial hesitation giving way to determination. This wasn't just about calling out prejudice. It was about building bridges and creating solutions. By the time Layla left, he felt a newfound sense of purpose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the construction site, Jordan stood by the edge of the lot, watching the workers pack up for the day. He thought about Wallace, about his team, and about the path ahead. Change wouldn't come easily, but it was a challenge he was ready to face. Tomorrow, he would step onto the site not just as an engineer, but as a leader in the truest sense of the word. And this time, he wouldn't just be building structures. He'd be laying the foundation for something far greater. The ripples begin. The sun was high overhead the next day when Jordan Blake arrived at the construction site. The events of the previous day still lingered in his mind, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the tasks ahead. Yet, as he greeted his team and began reviewing blueprints, he noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Workers who had been quietly supportive yesterday now approached him with newfound confidence. "Morning, boss," Mason said, tipping his hard hat. "You got a minute?" Jordan looked up from his clipboard. "Sure, what's up?" Mason glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. Some of the guys were talking. "We think we should do something about what happened yesterday. Maybe organize a meeting or something. You know, talk about how we can stick together if it happens again." Jordan blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. "A meeting?" "Yeah," Mason said, scratching the back of his neck. "You handled that cop like a pro, but it shouldn't be just on you. We've all seen stuff like that, and it ain't right. Maybe we can figure out how to back each other up better." The idea resonated with Jordan. He had always believed in leading by example, but the thought of his team rallying together to address bias and inequality was inspiring. "Let's make it happen," he said. "After work today, we'll meet in the site office." Mason grinned. "You got it, boss." A meeting of minds. By the time the workday ended, a surprising number of workers had gathered in the cramped site office. The space, normally filled with blueprints and tools, now buzzed with voices and energy. Jordan stood at the front, looking out at the group of men and women who had come together for a common purpose. "All right, everyone," he began, raising a hand for quiet. "Thanks for staying late." Mason had the idea to get together and talk about what happened yesterday, and I think it's a good one. So let's start there. What are your thoughts? Andrew, the younger worker, spoke up first. "I think it's great you stood up to that cop, Mr. Blake, but it's messed up that you even had to. If it had been me, I don't think I could have stayed that calm." "You shouldn't have to," Jordan said. "No one should. But situations like that happen all the time, and we can't just ignore them. The question is, what can we do about it?" The room fell silent for a moment, the workers exchanging uncertain glances. Finally, an older electrician named Carla spoke. "We can start by having each other's backs. If someone gets singled out again, we don't just stand there. We step in, respectfully but firmly, and make it clear that we're a team." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "That's a good start," Jordan said. "But we also need to think bigger. This isn't just about this site or that officer. It's about the system that allows this kind of behavior to go unchecked. If we want real change, we need to address the root of the problem." The bigger picture. Over the next hour, the workers brainstormed ways to support each other and advocate for change. They discussed everything from recording incidents to filing formal complaints with city officials. Jordan listened, offering guidance where needed but allowing the group to take ownership of the discussion. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. They would form a workers' committee to address issues of bias and inequality on the site and beyond. The committee would meet regularly to discuss concerns, share resources, and ensure everyone felt supported. As the workers dispersed, Jordan felt a swell of pride. This was more than he had ever expected. A team of individuals coming together to stand for something greater than themselves. A surprise call. The next morning, as Jordan reviewed blueprints in his site office, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, surprised to see an unfamiliar number. "This is Jordan Blake," he answered. "Mr. Blake, this is Lieutenant Emma Torres from the Atlanta Police Department." Jordan sat up straighter, his mind racing. "Lieutenant Torres, what can I do for you?" "I'm calling about the incident you experienced with Officer Wallace," she said, her tone professional but measured. "The Civil Rights Commission brought it to our attention. I want to assure you that we take these matters seriously. I'd like to meet with you to discuss it further." Jordan hesitated, unsure of the lieutenant's intentions. "I appreciate the outreach, Lieutenant, but if we're going to meet, I'd like to make sure it's more than just a conversation. This needs to lead to actionable change." "I couldn't agree more," Torres said. "We're looking into mandatory bias training for our officers, but we need input from the community to make it effective. If you're willing, I'd like you to be part of that process." Jordan's mind weared. The opportunity to influence systemic change was significant, but it was also daunting. "All right," he said finally. Let's set up a meeting. The first step. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at a neutral venue, a community center in downtown Atlanta. When Jordan arrived, he was greeted by Lieutenant Torres, a composed woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. Beside her stood several other officers, as well as representatives from the Civil Rights Commission and community leaders. "Mr. Blake," Torres said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," Jordan replied, shaking her hand firmly. The meeting began with Torres outlining the department's plan to address bias within its ranks. She emphasized the importance of community involvement and invited feedback from everyone in attendance. When it was Jordan's turn to speak, he stood, his voice steady but passionate. He recounted his experience with Wallace, highlighting the broader implications of such encounters. "This isn't just about one officer or one incident," he said. "It's about a system that needs to change. And that change starts with accountability and education." His words resonated, sparking a lively discussion among the attendees. Ideas flowed from improved officer training to community outreach programs. By the end of the meeting, a clear path forward had begun to take shape. A ripple of hope. As Jordan left the community center that evening, he felt a mix of exhaustion and hope. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time, he felt that real change was possible. The following days brought a flurry of activity. Jordan balanced his work on the construction site with his new role as an advocate, attending meetings, drafting proposals, and coordinating with the workers' committee. The ripples of his actions were spreading, drawing attention from local media and other organizations. What had started as a confrontation on a dusty construction site was quickly becoming a movement, one that had the potential to reshape not just his industry, but his community. Confronting the system. A week after the pivotal community meeting, Jordan Blake found himself standing outside the Atlanta Police Department headquarters. The towering building loomed above him, its glass facade reflecting the midday sun. He adjusted the strap of his satchel, his thoughts racing. Today was the day he'd meet with high-ranking police officials to discuss the systemic changes proposed by the Civil Rights Commission and the Workers' Committee he had helped form. Jordan took a deep breath and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was bustling with officers and civilians, the air thick with purpose. He approached the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a kind but weary expression. "Jordan Blake," he said. "I have a meeting with Lieutenant Emma Torres." The woman nodded and gestured toward a nearby seating area. "She'll be down shortly." As Jordan sat, he pulled out a small notebook filled with notes and ideas. His plan was clear: advocate for real, actionable change. No empty promises or vague commitments. This meeting had to result in tangible steps toward accountability and equity. The meeting begins. 15 minutes later, Lieutenant Torres appeared, her stride confident and purposeful. "Mr. Blake," she said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." Jordan stood and shook her hand. "Thank you for inviting me." She led him down a long hallway and into a conference room where a group of officials waited. Among them was Captain Harold Decker, a stoic man with a sharp jawline and an air of authority. Seated beside him were members of the department's internal affairs team, community liaisons, and representatives from the Civil Rights Commission. "Let's get started," Torres said, taking her seat at the head of the table. The meeting began with a recap of the incident involving Officer Wallace. Torres outlined the department's ongoing internal review and emphasized their commitment to addressing bias through new training programs. Jordan listened carefully, his expression neutral but focused. When it was his turn to speak, he stood, placing his hands on the table for emphasis. "I appreciate the steps you're taking," he began, "but we need to go further. Training is important, yes, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. Without accountability, training becomes meaningless. Officers need to know that their actions have consequences." Captain Decker's brow furrowed. "And what do you propose, Mr. Blake?" "Increased oversight. More red tape." Jordan met his gaze evenly. I propose transparency, clear policies for reporting and addressing misconduct, regular audits of department practices, and most importantly, involving the community in these processes. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the group. Finally, one of the community liaisons spoke. I think he's right. If we're going to rebuild trust, we need to show the public that we're not just policing them. We're working with them. Torres nodded. I agree. Let's draft a framework for these measures and present it to the department heads. The workers' voice. Meanwhile, back at the construction site, the workers' committee was gaining momentum. Mason, Ander, Carla, and others had taken it upon themselves to distribute flyers about upcoming workshops and meetings. They had even started a weekly newsletter, sharing updates on their efforts and encouraging others to get involved. One afternoon, as Jordan was inspecting a steel beam installation, Mason approached him with a clipboard. Hey, boss, he said. We've got some signatures for the petition. Jordan glanced at the clipboard, surprised to see over 50 names. This is incredible, he said, flipping through the pages. What's the petition for? Mason grinned. We're asking the city to make bias training mandatory for all public employees, not just cops. Figured we'd start small and work our way up. Jordan chuckled. That's ambitious, Mason. I like it. Your meeting at the department gave us the push we needed, Mason said. We figured if you can stand up in front of those folks, we can do our part too. A shift in the narrative. As word of Jordan's efforts spread, local media began to take notice. Reporters visited the construction site, interviewing workers and community members about the growing movement. Headlines like "Engineer Turns Confrontation into Catalyst for Change" and "Workers Unite to Demand Equity and Accountability" filled the local news cycle. One evening, Jordan found himself sitting on his living room couch, watching a news segment about the movement. The camera panned across the construction site, capturing the workers in action, before cutting to an interview with Mason. This isn't just about one incident, Mason said, his voice steady but passionate. It's about making sure no one has to deal with what Mr. Blake went through. We're all in this together. Jordan felt a swell of pride. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was a collective effort, driven by a shared belief in justice and equity. The ripple effect. The momentum of the movement began to extend beyond Atlanta. Emails and phone calls poured in from other cities, with workers, community leaders, and even law enforcement officers expressing interest in replicating the initiatives. Jordan found himself fielding requests for interviews and speaking engagements. His quiet life as an engineer transformed into one of advocacy and leadership. One day, he received an email that stopped him in his tracks. It was from Officer Wallace. Mr. Blake, I've been reflecting on our encounter, and I realize I was wrong. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and for that I'm sorry. I've enrolled in a bias training program on my own time because I want to do better. Thank you for showing me that change is possible. Kurt Wallace. Jordan stared at the screen, his emotions a mix of surprise, relief, and cautious optimism. This was the kind of impact he had hoped for, not just policy changes, but genuine shifts in mindset. A movement takes root. As weeks turned into months, the initiatives Jordan had helped spark began to bear fruit. The Atlanta Police Department implemented mandatory bias training, complete with community-led workshops. The city approved the workers' petition, extending the training to all public employees. And the construction site, once the backdrop of a tense confrontation, became a symbol of unity and progress. Jordan stood on the site one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Mason joined him, leaning against a railing. You know, Mason said, when this all started, I didn't think we'd get this far. Neither did I, Jordan admitted. But look at what we've built. Mason grinned, and we're just getting started. Bridges of change. The Atlanta skyline glimmered in the twilight as Jordan Blake sat at his desk in the site office. His phone buzzed incessantly with emails and messages, most of them related to the growing movement he had inadvertently started. What had begun as a single incident on the construction site was now a citywide conversation, with ripples spreading beyond Georgia. Jordan rubbed his temples, the weight of it all sinking in. He hadn't set out to be an activist. He was an engineer, a builder. But now he found himself building something far more complex than skyscrapers: trust, accountability, and hope. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. Mason peeked in, holding a thick stack of papers. "Boss, you got a minute?" Jordan waved him in. "What's up?" Mason set the stack on the desk. Petition signatures, over 1,000 now. People from all over the city, not just the site. Carla's been working overtime getting the word out. Jordan raised an eyebrow, impressed. He flipped through the pages, noting the diverse names and neighborhoods represented. "This is incredible. You all have really stepped up. Only because you gave us a reason to," Mason said. "But there's more. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wants to do a feature on the movement. They're calling it the Blake Initiative." Jordan chuckled, shaking his head. "I didn't ask for my name on this." "Doesn't matter," Mason said with a grin. "You're the face of it, whether you like it or not." The interview. A few days later, Jordan found himself sitting in a quiet coffee shop across from a journalist named Talia Green. Her sharp eyes and notebook suggested she missed nothing. The recorder between them whirred softly as she leaned forward, pen poised. "Jordan, you've gone from being a structural engineer to a community leader. How does that feel?" Jordan took a sip of his coffee, considering his words. "Honestly, overwhelming. I've always believed in the power of teamwork, whether it's on a construction site or in the community. But I never expected to be in this position." Talia nodded. "Why do you think your story has resonated with so many people?" "Because it's not just my story," Jordan said. "It's the story of anyone who's been underestimated, dismissed, or treated unfairly. People see themselves in what happened, and they want change." She scribbled a note. "And what does change look like to you?" "Accountability, education, and opportunity," Jordan said. "We need systems that hold people responsible for their actions, training that challenges biases, and opportunities for those who've been marginalized to succeed." Backlash and resolve. As the movement gained traction, it also attracted criticism. Online forums buzzed with debates, some questioning the need for change, others attacking Jordan personally. He tried to ignore the noise, but one particularly harsh comment stuck with him. Another attention seeker playing the victim card. "Stick to your blueprints and leave the real work to the professionals." Jordan read the comments several times, the words stinging more than he cared to admit. That night, as he sat in his living room, he called his sister, Elena, a lawyer and one of his closest confidants. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this," he admitted. "People are saying I should stay in my lane." Elena's voice was firm. "Your lane is wherever you choose it to be, Jordan. You've always been about building things. Why should this be any different? Haters are going to hate. Focus on the people you're helping." Her words struck a chord. Jordan realized that the criticism was a sign that he was challenging the status quo. And that was exactly what needed to happen. The community forum. A week later, Jordan stood on the stage of a packed community center, his heart pounding as he faced the crowd. The event was a public forum organized by the Civil Rights Commission, bringing together city officials, law enforcement, and residents to discuss equity and accountability. Lieutenant Emma Torres sat in the front row, her expression unreadable. Beside her was Officer Wallace, his posture stiff, but his face lacking the arrogance it once carried. Mason, Carla, and dozens of workers from the site filled the seats behind them, their presence a reassuring wave of support. Jordan stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Tonight, we're here to talk about change, not just in policies, but in how we see and treat each other." He paused, scanning the room. "What happened to me on that construction site wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that too many people face every day. But it also sparked something powerful, a movement led by ordinary people who decided enough was enough. The crowd erupted into applause, and Jordan continued, laying out the committee's proposals. Mandatory bias training for all public employees, a transparent complaint process, and regular community police dialogues. When he finished, Torres stood, addressing the crowd. "I want to thank Mr. Blake for his courage and leadership. The department is committed to implementing these measures, and we're already taking steps to make them a reality." The forum ended with a standing ovation. But for Jordan, it was just the beginning. The unexpected ally. As the crowd dispersed, Officer Wallace approached Jordan, his expression uncertain. "Mr. Blake," he began, his voice quieter than Jordan had ever heard it, "I owe you an apology." Jordan raised an eyebrow, surprised but cautious. "Go on." "I was wrong that day," Wallace admitted, his gaze dropping. "I let my biases get in the way, and I didn't treat you fairly. I've been attending the training sessions, and it's opened my eyes to things I didn't want to see. I'm sorry." Jordan studied him for a moment, then extended a hand. "Apology accepted. But remember, this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been in my shoes. What are you going to do to make it right?" Wallace nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "I'll do better, and I'll make sure others do too." The new blueprint. In the weeks that followed, the changes began to take shape. The Atlanta Police Department rolled out its new training program, and community members were invited to participate as facilitators. The Workers' Committee expanded its efforts, pushing for similar initiatives in other industries. And Jordan, though reluctant to step into the spotlight, became a sought-after speaker, sharing his story and advocating for systemic change. One evening, as Jordan walked the construction site, Mason joined him, gesturing to the nearly completed building. "You think we'll finish on time?" Jordan smiled. "We always do." Mason nodded, then added, "You know, boss, this building isn't the only thing you've built. You've shown us what it means to stand up and fight for something." Jordan looked out at the skyline. The city bathed in the golden light of dusk. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "And we're not done yet." As the first stars appeared in the sky, Jordan felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The foundation had been laid, but there was still so much to build. Bridges between people, structures of trust, and towers of hope. And Jordan was ready to keep building. The legacy of action. Months had passed since the pivotal community forum, but the ripples of change it had set in motion continued to grow. Atlanta, once a city divided by invisible barriers of mistrust and bias, was slowly transforming. Initiatives sparked by Jordan Blake and his allies were gaining traction, and their impact was undeniable. But for Jordan, the work was far from over. It was a crisp autumn morning when Jordan found himself standing in front of the nearly completed high-rise his team had been working on for over a year. The gleaming structure stood as a testament to their labor and expertise, a physical manifestation of perseverance and collaboration. Yet, as he gazed up at the towering building, Jordan's thoughts drifted to the metaphorical structures he was helping build, structures of equity, accountability, and understanding. A letter from the mayor. Jordan's phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his thoughts. He pulled it out to find an email notification. The subject line caught his eye immediately. Invitation from Mayor Alicia Hernandez. His heart quickened as he opened the message. "Dear Mr. Blake, on behalf of the City of Atlanta, I want to commend you for your leadership and advocacy. Your efforts have not only highlighted critical issues, but also provided actionable solutions that have already begun to reshape our city. I would be honored if you would join us as a keynote speaker at the upcoming City of Progress Summit, where we'll discuss the future of equity and innovation in Atlanta. Your story is one that every leader in this city should hear. Sincerely, Mayor Alicia Hernandez." Jordan leaned back in his chair, stunned. The summit was one of the city's most prestigious events, attended by policymakers, business leaders, and community advocates. The thought of speaking on such a stage was daunting, but it was also an opportunity he couldn't ignore. He quickly typed a reply, accepting the invitation, then set his phone down, his mind already racing with ideas for his speech. The City of Progress Summit. A month later, Jordan found himself standing backstage at the grand auditorium where the summit was being held. The space buzzed with energy as attendees mingled, their conversations a blend of optimism and determination. Jordan adjusted his tie, his nerves humming. Public speaking had never been his forte, but he knew this moment was bigger than his discomfort. A staff member approached him with a warm smile. "Mr. Blake, you're up in 5 minutes. Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Jordan replied, forcing a smile. As he stepped onto the stage, the applause that greeted him was both humbling and overwhelming. He paused at the podium, scanning the sea of faces before him. Among them, he spotted familiar ones: Mason, Carla, Lieutenant Torres, and even Officer Wallace, seated together in the front row. Jordan took a deep breath, his voice steady as he began. "Good afternoon. My name is Jordan Blake, and I'm an engineer by trade. But today, I stand before you as something more, a builder not just of structures, but of bridges between people, systems, and communities." He recounted the incident with Officer Wallace, the formation of the Workers' Committee, and the initiatives that had grown from those moments. But he didn't stop there. He spoke about the systemic challenges that still remained, urging everyone in the room to see themselves as agents of change. "Progress isn't about grand gestures," he said, his voice firm but earnest. "It's about the small, consistent actions we take every day. It's about speaking up when we see injustice, standing together when it's easier to stay silent, and building systems that reflect the values we claim to hold." The room erupted into applause as he finished, a standing ovation that left Jordan momentarily speechless. He stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. A chance encounter. After the speech, Jordan mingled with the attendees, answering questions and sharing insights. As the crowd began to thin, a young woman approached him, her expression both nervous and determined. "Mr. Blake," she said, extending a hand. "My name is Tasha. I'm a civil engineering student at Georgia Tech. I've been following your work, and I just wanted to thank you. Seeing someone like you in this field, it's inspiring." Jordan smiled, shaking her hand. "Thank you, Tasha. What year are you?" "I'm a junior," she said. "It's tough sometimes, being one of the few women, and even fewer black women, in the program. But your story reminds me why I'm here." Jordan's chest swelled with pride and responsibility. "If you ever need guidance or support, don't hesitate to reach out," he said, handing her his business card. "We need more voices like yours in this field." Tasha's face lit up. "Thank you, sir. I won't forget this." A call for broader impact. In the weeks following the summit, Jordan's influence continued to grow. He was invited to speak at universities, community centers, and even corporate offices, sharing his journey and advocating for systemic change. Meanwhile, the Workers' Committee expanded its efforts, partnering with other organizations to push for equity initiatives across the city. One evening, as Jordan sat in his home office, he received a call from Lieutenant Torres. "Jordan," she began, her tone unusually serious. "We've been reviewing the data from the new training programs and community initiatives. The results are promising, but there's still a lot of work to do. I'd like to propose something bigger, a task force dedicated to addressing bias and equity across all city departments, and I want you to lead it." Jordan was stunned. "Me? I'm not a policymaker." "No," Torres said, "but you're a leader. You've already proven that. This isn't about titles. It's about making a difference." Jordan hesitated, the weight of the offer sinking in. But as he thought about the journey that had brought him here, the workers who had stood by him, the initiatives they had built together, the lives they had touched, he realized he couldn't say no. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it. Building the future." The task force became Jordan's next great project, a multidisciplinary team of community leaders, city officials, and subject matter experts working to dismantle systemic barriers and create equitable opportunities for all Atlantans. Their work was challenging, often met with resistance, but Jordan approached it with the same precision and determination he brought to his engineering projects. One day, as he walked through a park near the construction site, now complete and bustling with activity, he saw a familiar figure. It was Tasha, the civil engineering student, leading a group of children on a tour of the site. "Mr. Blake," she called, waving him over. "I wanted to show them the building you helped create." Jordan joined the group, smiling as Tasha explained the engineering marvels behind the structure. As the children peppered him with questions, he realized that the true legacy of his work wasn't the building itself. It was the inspiration it sparked in others. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the skyline, Jordan felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had set out to build structures, but he had built so much more: a movement, a community, a legacy. And he knew, without a doubt, that the work would continue. Brick by brick, bridge by bridge, life by life. The park bustled with life, the hum of activity blending with the laughter of children and the distant sound of traffic. Jordan stood amidst the group of young students, their wide-eyed curiosity reminding him of his own journey, starting as a kid with a dream to build things that would outlast him. Tasha, the civil engineering student, had taken the role of a guide, explaining the intricacies of the structure they were visiting. It was the same high-rise Jordan had overseen, a towering testament to perseverance and unity. But now, it symbolized more than just architectural ingenuity. It represented the collective power of a community standing together against adversity. Jordan listened as Tasha passionately described the engineering marvels to the kids. Her confidence, which had been tentative when they first met, now radiated with purpose. As he watched her, he realized the most significant impact he had made wasn't in the buildings he'd constructed, but in the lives he touched and the paths he helped pave. A conversation of closure. As the tour wrapped up, Jordan walked with Tasha toward a bench near the park's fountain. The autumn breeze rustled the leaves above them, casting golden light over the scene. "Mr. Blake," Tasha began, breaking the comfortable silence, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how progress isn't just about big gestures, but the little actions we take every day. I think I finally get it." Jordan smiled. "That's the key, Tasha. The small actions ripple out and create waves, but those ripples don't happen without someone willing to make the first move." Tasha nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think we'll ever get there? To a place where people don't have to fight so hard for fairness?" Jordan's smile faltered slightly as he considered her question. "I don't know if we'll ever fully get there," he admitted. "But I do know this. Every step we take gets us closer, and if enough of us are willing to stand up and push for change, we'll build a better world for those who come after us." Tasha's expression softened. "Like you did." Jordan chuckled. "Like we're doing. This isn't just my fight, it's ours." The final task force meeting. Months later, the task force Jordan led convened for its final scheduled meeting. Over the past year, they had implemented sweeping changes across city departments: mandatory bias training for public employees, a transparent system for reporting misconduct, and regular community dialogues to foster trust. Their work wasn't finished, but the foundation was strong. Lieutenant Torres opened the meeting, her tone both celebratory and reflective. "What we've accomplished here is no small feat. We've turned conversations into action, and action into results. But we couldn't have done it without Jordan's leadership." The room erupted in applause as Torres gestured for Jordan to speak. He stood, the weight of the journey evident in his posture, but his voice carried with it the quiet strength that had come to define him. "When we started this, I wasn't sure what to expect," he said. "I'm not a politician or an activist. I'm an engineer. My job has always been to solve problems, to build things. And I realized that the principles of engineering apply here too. Identify the issues, find the right tools, and work together to create something that lasts. He paused, scanning the room. But what we've built isn't just policies or programs. We've built hope. We've shown that change is possible when people come together. And while there's still work to be done, I believe we've created a blueprint for others to follow. As he sat down, the applause was thunderous, a fitting conclusion to a chapter in a journey that had changed lives, including his own. A quiet legacy. In the years that followed, the initiatives Jordan had helped spearhead became models for cities across the country. His name was etched into the history of Atlanta, not just as a structural engineer, but as a community leader who had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. Jordan, however, remained humble. He returned to his roots, continuing his work as an engineer while mentoring young professionals like Tasha and advocating for equity in every space he entered. His days were filled with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the ripples he'd created were still spreading, touching lives he might never meet. One evening, as he walked through the park where Tasha had led the children's tour, he stopped at a plaque near the fountain. It had been installed by the city to honor his contributions, but what caught his eye were the words inscribed beneath his name. For those who build bridges where walls once stood, and for those who believe in the power of small actions to change the world. Jordan smiled, his heart full. He had set out to build structures, but his greatest creation had been the community he had inspired. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a warm golden light, Jordan walked away with the quiet certainty that the legacy of what they had built together would stand the test of time.